department in the United States that a drone from the County of Alameda would be purchasing from in terms of the United States?
Um, sure. So the cost now, in many cases, with law enforcement drones, it's in the range of tens of thousands of dollars, and these are purchased in many cases across the country using funds that come from grants from the Department of Homeland Security or pass-through agencies, where the Department of Homeland Security gives the money to a more local organization that distributes that. Um, we've gotten some information about that in Alameda County, for example, through Public Records Act and FOIA requests that I can speak to more. And Linda and the ACLU have also been involved with that. And so it varies in different areas, but the money is generally coming from the DHS or a subsidiary, and the it's the drone industry that's selling these.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Commissioner Sherman with the Police Review Commission. Two questions. First of all, I thought I heard on the news that a committee or a subcommittee of the California legislature was meeting either yesterday or today on this issue. Do you have any information on that? My first question.
Um, I've got only basic information. Yes, there's legislation that's in play, and maybe some of the other guests can speak more to it.
And my second question, which I was also going to address to the speaker of the ACLU, I think in a matter of maybe strategy, would either one or both of you, if you get a chance to address this, advise that this commission, I'm speaking for my commission now because they have a different task, this body adopt a straight no drones in Berkeley, period, or drones with the following regulations, rules, conditions? What would be your advice?
Well, I mean, I think that this is a decision that you know, I hate to pass the buck here, but I think this is something that needs to be decided on with the considerations of this commission, and that's something that I can't really do for you. I think that there are people who are from Berkeley here who say no drones, and I think that we should listen to them. That ultimately there should at least be restrictions, and I think depending on what this commission and the other commissions determine to be the best.
May I ask a question?
Later.
That happens at the end.
This is just for the commissioners. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Commissioner Noah Sochet of the Peace and Justice Commission. I'm curious, we hear a lot about drone use by city agencies, like law enforcement. Could you speak for a moment to potential drone use by private companies or even individuals, and what the concerns might be there?
There are concerns, and it's sort of a different set of concerns, and it's one that we haven't focused as much on when it comes to private individuals, and especially hobbyists, people who we talk about drones as a large category, but in some cases it's what we're talking about aren't dissimilar from the kind of hobby airplanes that people have been flying for decades in parks. And certainly it raises some concerns, but there's a unique class of concerns that come specifically from law enforcement doing that, and that's it can be used against you in court. It can be used the law enforcement can do things that private citizens can't, and so I think that there are certainly concerns, but that law enforcement bears a higher level of scrutiny. I think we're at time.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm sorry. Barb, you can address this.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Patrick Egan of the UAVSI, the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Hello, everyone. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm listening to the people coming up here and speaking, and people raise some valid concerns, but I think that we're kind of painting this technology with a broad brush. I hear a lot of capabilities and things that drones can do, and I mean, I've got to be honest, I'm kind of listening to this, and some of it right now is still science fiction, one. Two, I think that people think that a lot of these surveillance technologies that drones represent are, let's say, specific to drones, which is just not true. It's not true at all. Sensors. Another thing we have to talk about is there's one back there I brought. It's a little parrot drone. You can buy these at Brookstone and Radio Shack. I also brought some pictures I took I have my own drone, cost $29 to make. I got into this doing it commercially. There's a lot of different uses and there's a wide spectrum of cost. Some of the capabilities that we're talking about to like keep whole cities under surveillance. The aircraft that can carry that type of surveillance equipment costs $215 million a piece. The equipment itself is in the tens of millions of dollars. I don't know, maybe Berkeley's different and you guys are sitting on a bunch of money here. I don't know, but even Homeland Security, even the military really can't afford to fly this aircraft. Costs $38,000 an hour to fly these aircraft. So that as citizens seeing them every day over our cities, I think that that's going to be far off into the future. What this technology represents to law enforcement, first responders, fire, up here, actually right now, the book that I put into the record for reference, the fellow that wrote that book is working with NIST, which is the National Institute for Science Testing, and they're trying to do grass fire studies, much like you would have up here in the hills, to try to save homes and do modeling and science and understand what fires do. Police can use these for all kinds of situations, hostage, lost children, search and rescue, whatever else. Some of the concerns that I hear about people saying, oh, well, it's going to chill my free speech. I was down on, is that 4th Street down there where they have the market and whatever, and I saw cameras there. All of these technologies that we're afraid of on drones already exist, I'm sure, in the inventory of the police. I don't know what the police have as far as aerial assets. Do they have helicopters? No helicopters, no fixed-wing aircraft. Not allowed at all. Not in the city. Well, usually, a lot of cities do have those. I don't know why you guys don't have one here, but I mean, if there's certain situations. Well, public safety is not an issue for you. You'd rather have privacy than public safety.
Oh, it's a choice, huh?
Well, it is a choice. I mean, you can.
Privacy is public safety.
Privacy, maybe it is public safety. I don't know. I guess that's for everyone to decide. But why would you have surveillance cameras down on 4th Street then if you're not really concerned about public safety and you're more concerned with privacy? I mean, are there other surveillance cameras around town? Is that part of a criminal deterrent?
We don't like those either.
So you want to ban those? You want to ban cameras? Okay. Well, anyway, so I mean, you have to consider that these technologies already exist. The license plate reading, they do it from cars. They can listen to your cell phone conversations. Whatever you put on the internet. Nobody has to. Your text, they hand them over. If you use Google, and I'm not trying to dodge. I'm just saying. The technology that's out there that they're talking about for drones and what we need to ban drones for exists in other avenues. I think you need to keep an open mind with that. And I think this technology can help. I mean, the other things with the no drone zone, I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. Is this also going to be no drones for the university? And we're not going to do any science. We're not going to do any agriculture, feed a hungry world, defeat famine. We're not doing that. I went. What?
This is why back and forth.
Okay. Well, and then the other thing is, I mean, I went and visited there's a company here in town that develops and sells drones. It's sold probably tens of thousands of them. You know, I mean, are they gonna be told to leave town, or we don't want them here? I mean, I guess, you know, for me, I'm a little confused of how far this is gonna go. Are we going to say, well, this technology can be abused, and so, we should just not have it? I mean, is that the same, is that with the internet and the cell phone? And they're just comparisons. I think that people need to think about that. I will say that I commend the city and everyone here for the participation in this conversation. I personally, this is what I suggest that people do. You have to get everyone involved in the conversation, the police, the fire, the citizenry. I do think I'm in favor of, if the police are gonna use this technology where it would constitute a search, then yes, you need to get a warrant. I do believe in the Constitution, and I do believe in some privacy. I also think that, you know, there are the potentials for, let's say, abuses. We've seen this with some of the military systems. Some people don't agree with that. I don't really agree with the weaponized stuff, but, you know, I did what I could. You know, I voted because this is still America. I don't think that police departments should talk about weaponizing drones. I don't think domestically they should be weaponized at all. That's crazy. And I would say that, you know, we need to take a holistic look at this technology. There is a lot of good that can be done with this. I think that, you know, the community could come together like we're doing now. If the police wanted to adopt them, we should all come together and we should have a conversation about that and work on best practices and say, okay, well, if you know, the fire department wants to use it and they want to use it to fight, you know, grass fires or find hot spots in houses, you know, instead of having to go up on the roof with a chainsaw and cut a hole out, they could use a drone, fly up there, use an IR camera to see if there's still hot spots, or if there are people in the house, and those are some of the beneficial uses, some of the scientific uses. I do a podcast. I talk to all kinds of people that work at NASA or NOAA or, you know, any one of these USGS, and the scientific data that they collect with these systems is unprecedented, and they are gaining science and data for weather modeling, you know, monitoring endangered species, anti-logging, anti-deforestation. We can, you know, monitor public and private asset management and whatever else. So I think you need to take a whole look at that. I would suggest if you are going to use it, sit down together as a community and say, okay, you know, police department, this is how you can use it. And, you know, if we could have a little contract together, maybe we could use it that way. And that's really what I hope to achieve by being here. Also in the back, I brought the little drone. Like I said, there's a couple of pictures that I took when I was doing this commercially. And then also, we're going to have a show that's all, let's say, business uses for this technology. And we would say maybe, hey, come on out. Also, my card's back there. And if anybody ever wants to talk about this technology or go into depth or have other questions about it, I will make myself available and talk. And then also, I brought with me Mr. Chad Partridge, who is a board member of AUESI proper. And he'd be happy to answer any questions also.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and one other thing. Alameda is not the first police department to have a drone. Sacramento had two of them in 2007.
I just, thank you. I wanted to state for the record, since it was brought up and I wanted to state it earlier, I'm Commissioner Duvall from the Police Review Commission, and both, our commission has actually sent invitations to the police department and to the fire department, and they both declined to participate in today's event. So we would have liked to have had those perspectives here as well, and to hear their thoughts on the issue, but they chose not to participate.
George Littman, Peace and Justice Commission. If you could, Mr. Egan, explain a little bit about your organization, its connections, if any, to drone manufacturers, and if they supply any of the funding of your organization, and what your function is.
Okay, those are a few questions. The Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International promotes unmanned technologies and robotics technologies. What we try to do is we do some educational outreach for STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, education. We are pro-engineering. We get our funding from our members mainly, and that's public information. You can go on the website auvsi.org. Technically, I've been a part of this for about 8+ years, and I used to do this commercially before it was illegal. This drone thing is not new. I was taking pictures 8 years ago as part of my construction business, and then the FAA clarified their policy in 2007 and said you couldn't do this anymore commercially or whatever else. But this has been going on for a long time. One other point I think that's important that I make is a lot of people think that this is military technology, and that's not really the case. There are some of the more prolific systems like Aerosonde was developed by a gentleman named Ted McGeer, and as the name would imply, sonde, it was made to collect weather data for hurricanes. Another system, the ScanEagle, which Boeing now owns, was developed to find tuna fish. Launch from a ship, fly out, find schools of tuna fish. I guess a sashimi grade tuna is worth about $6,500. So it did get co-opted.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the answer to my question, or I didn't quite understand it. So are you a lobbying organization? Are you related to the drone manufacturers? Or are you just a nonprofit group of hobbyists? Or what exactly are you?
No, the AUVSI, I'm the president of the Silicon Valley chapter. And basically, most of our mission is educational outreach and, promoting the technology. The association as a whole is more, I guess it's like a trade association. And primarily the people that are members of that make drones, but also robotics and other companies that make, let's say, sensors or software, things like that. So ancillary parts and pieces and whatnot. Any other questions from the panel?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker will be Attorney Neil Sutherland from the Alameda County against drones.
Use the microphone,
Yes.
please.
Our next speaker is Attorney
Neil Sutherland from Alameda County against drones.
Hi. I am as advertised. Neil Sutherland, Alameda County Against Drones. So I generally like to focus in on a point that Linda touched on, mission creep. The argument is that we need drones for this, list of sort of grave public safety outbreaks. If something catches fire, or we need to hunt down a missing child, then why would we leave this technology on the table? The argument always strikes me as sort of secretly ominous because it sounds so much like the argument that gets used to sell, other police militarization, like, I think the sterling example is SWAT teams. SWAT teams started to roll out in the 60s and more in the 70s in response to, the argument that was put before legislatures and police departments to explain why they were necessary was always premised around some specific horrible event like the clock tower shooting or, heavily armed bank robberies. And the claim was that we needed these, massively armed police units to respond to emergencies of that kind. And then SWAT teams sort of became the norm. Lots and lots of people had them. They were getting deployed, to respond to huge public emergencies. But as the technology sort of settled in and everybody became accustomed to it, it soon became clear that, there wasn't an excellent reason for the police to leave their funnest toy in its box most of the time. And so more and more, well, first of all, the rate of deployment of SWAT teams is going up exponentially. When they were first rolling out, they would get used, several times a year. There were, a couple of hundred
70s. Now I think the last estimate I heard was either 40 or 50,000 deployments a year. And while that expansion has been taking place of the actual use of the technology, the thing to which it is responding has sort of broadened and gotten, you no longer need a clock tower shooter to send out a SWAT team. Some 83% of SWAT deployments a few years ago were the routine service of search warrants to find drugs. So while it may be true that the idea of a Gorgon stair system surveilling the entire city at once forever is this sort of parade of horribles off in the future sort of thing, the same was true of the war on drugs and the way that it's currently being fought in the 60s and the 70s when we were learning why we needed SWAT teams. So, if you had told somebody back then that the technology they were installing was going to get used to kick people's door in the night to see if they have pot, I think that would have been surprising because all we were hearing about then was that we needed to be able to deal with clock tower shooters. So I do not know what sorts of restrictions on drone use would be enough, because I do not know what currently unforeseeable mission drone use is going to creep into. If they wind up getting used to conduct stop and frisk searches, then we will need a very different set of regulations than if we think we're setting up rules governing a technology that's going to be used to fight fires. And so given that sort of fundamental unpredictability of where this technology is going to go in the future, I think we should be deeply skeptical in the present of trying to, of believing that we are capable of setting up systems of rules that will protect us against whatever that is going to be. How am I doing on time? 2 minutes. Okay, then I'll go to the sheriff at the hearing that we had. I don't know if most of you were there, and I'm telling you things that you already know. He was explaining why the technology is safe. Somebody asked him if the drones that he was getting could be hacked. He was under the opinion that they could not, because the representative who was trying to sell him drones had told him that they employed frequency hopping. So does basically everything that uses a signal that is carried over the air, because otherwise they would all be jammed by one another. They hop around to find a frequency that they can use that isn't already occupied. We know how to hack that. We have known how to hack that for a very long time. Anytime anybody has intercepted a cell phone call, they are following something that is going through unencrypted frequency hopping. So the person who at the county level is arguing that he needs this technology does not understand the vulnerabilities of this technology, and thus curious as to what else he might not understand about things that this technology is used. We're sailing bravely into uncharted waters and should maybe spend a bit more time reconnoitering them.
Questions from the commissioners?
Thanks, Noah Sochet, Peace and Justice Commission. I'm curious, like I asked an earlier speaker, if you'd be interested in speaking to potential regulation of non-public agency drones. We've heard a lot about the dangers of police and law enforcement using drones, and I'm curious if you have thoughts about, particularly given your organization, if you have thoughts about how drones should be regulated or allowed or disallowed for folks that are outside of government.
The question is thorny because I, don't want to inadvertently ban people who, you know, make peculiar flying art at Burning Man. But anything that I've said about law enforcement coming and invading our privacy applies close to as well for your bigger and more horrifying multinational corporations. So the current Alameda County Against Drones position is that Alameda County had ought to be against drones. I don't quite know how to carve out the sorts of regulations that would allow somebody to, you know, use a drone the way that they would use a kite. But the current focus is on regulating public agency use because the public agency is currently the one who wants to get them.
Follow up on that?
Yes.
I don't know if you're the right, George Littman, Peace and Justice Commission. I don't know if you're the right attorney to direct this to, but I would like to understand about privacy law. I know freedom of speech applies to actions of government and not to the actions of individuals, as I understand it. What about privacy in California? Does it restrict my ability to spy on my neighbor the way it restricts government's ability to? I'm looking for precedent here.
I can talk about it.
Thank you.
Vina Dubal, Police Review Commission. I was going to ask you if you could reflect briefly on Alameda County Against Drones, since you are a community-based organization that's been working a lot on the issue, kind of who makes up the organization. I think that it would be useful for the commissioners to know what members of the city of Berkeley and of Alameda County more generally have been doing about this.
It was her idea. That is our founder, Mary Madden. We are a sort of steadily growing grassroots coalition with membership list of individuals and organizations that is on our website, which I really probably should have talked about before. nomby.wordpress.com. You can sign our petition, you can join our email list, we would love to have you. Let's see, Bill of Rights Defense Committee, some attorneys at, what? Sorry? Code Pink, OEA. I used to be able to rattle off the list much better than I can currently. National Lawyers Guild, Justice for Alvin Luther. Sorry?
Coalition for Safe Berkeley.
Coalition for Safe Berkeley. Me. Her. We occasionally do work in alliance with the National Lawyers Guild and the EFF, although they are not formal members. We are friends. We have been, we started out talking to the County Board of Supervisors. That is moving forward. We are suggesting legislation to them and doing legal research to patch over the feckless willingness of county council to abandon the police to do as they list. What else did you ask me to reflect on? Okay.
You said just mentioned you're suggesting legislation to someone I didn't hear who. Can you just give us a thumbnail sketch of what that legislation is that you're suggesting?
So Nadia will cover some of that as she has been most heavily involved with drafting it. We're talking to the County Board of Supervisors and seeing if anybody there would like to sponsor something. If you would like to mention to your supervisor that it would please you if they did, that would be very helpful. I'm sorry, I have that fault.
We can't hear.
Okay. Thank you.
Repeat what you said.
We are proposing legislation to the Board of Supervisors that is more or less a budgetary approach to blocking the sheriff from getting access to drones. We will be in touch with the public about how that effort moves forward. We are meeting with supervisors soon, ongoingly.
Our next presenter is Nadia Kayali. Our next presenter is Nadia Kayali from the Bill of Rights Defense Committee.
And if you have a PowerPoint. And I apologize to the commission, that the projector is behind you, so if you could just sort of try to take a look and I'll do my best to speak into the mic. Oh, it is. Hello? Okay. So for those who didn't catch it, my name is Nadia. I'm a legal fellow with the Bill of Rights Defense Committee.
You all see the screen okay? It's kind of an angle. You all see it? Straighten up.
It's really far back. I know.
Straighten out.
Technology doesn't always make things better.
Yeah, why did they do that before? Awesome. Now we got it. They're getting a presentation ready from, is this Alameda County Against Drones also? Nadia?
Bill Defense.
Oh, okay.
Bill of Rights, something.
Okay.
Bill of Rights Defense, something, but I can't remember the last one.
Bill of Rights Defense.
Bill of Rights Defense Committee.
I'm live streaming.
When you move the projector, I think it said, ooh.
Yeah.
I think it's still bugs.
We have drones?
If necessary, I can.
Drones take video, they don't project it.
There are full quotes on there that I'll have to look at. All right, well, I'll just go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, I'm from the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. We're a national organization that works on addressing national security policy that is eroding civil liberties. We are a national organization, but we work with grassroots groups around the country. Here in the East Bay, we work with the Coalition for Safe Berkeley, as well as Alameda County Against Drones. Alameda County Against Drones is a coalition opposing the use of law enforcement and corporate drones in our skies. I'm just going to read this quote from their website. We oppose the expanding surveillance state as a vehicle of repression against individuals, communities, and political movements. We support efforts to prohibit drone use in the U.S. and abroad. We stand in solidarity with the drone resistance movement, and we welcome support. So I just want to emphasize that Alameda County Against Drones does have an integrated approach to drones. They are concerned about police overreaching in a variety of forms. So they have a number of demands. I'm just going to go over these briefly. In addition to no drones over Alameda County, they also want to see an end to drone attacks abroad, no collaboration with immigration and customs enforcement, no jail expansion, and end to the enforcement of evictions. So the bottom line for Alameda County Against Drones, and I'm sorry that I don't know what's going on here, but we'll just
Move the
yeah.
cursor.
Yeah, we'll just go through. I mean, y'all can hear me, so that's all that really matters, right? And you'll still be able to see some of my delightful pictures. So the bottom line is that Alameda County Against Drones wants all of Alameda County to be a drone-free zone. Alameda County Against Drones believes the risks are far too great to justify any potential benefits from the use of drones for the following reasons. And those include privacy, militarization of police, corporate influence, biased policing, the First Amendment, safety and efficacy, and the overseas use of drones. So privacy, I just actually want to mention something that the gentleman from the Industry Association said. He said we need to look at drones in a holistic way. We need to look at these technologies in a holistic way. He's absolutely correct. The reason that drones are particularly concerning is because of the variety of technology that they can carry. Sure, there are surveillance cameras. Sure, law enforcement can employ infrared. All of these technologies exist. Drones are an incredibly potent package of some of the most concerning privacy-invading technologies that are available to law enforcement. And they are completely unregulated at this point, except for in the places that have had the foresight to pass some regulation. The picture up here is actually the drone that Sheriff Ahern brought to the hearing on the 14th. I wish that I had something to show you how big it is, but let me just tell you it's not very big. So Linda's example of a drone being able to hover over your backyard and see what you're doing, drones are in that way very substantively different from helicopters. They are much more capable of unnoticed surveillance, and that is particularly concerning. It's also particularly concerning here in Berkeley. I want to mention some Berkeley-specific things. Berkeley is specifically opposed to surveillance without reasonable suspicion. In September of last year, the City Council voted to become the first and only municipality to place limits on suspicious activity reporting, which Linda mentioned. Here in Berkeley, you can only do suspicious activity reporting if there's reasonable suspicion. And I'm happy to answer more questions about suspicious activity reporting during the Q&A period, but I just want to emphasize where we are. We are in Berkeley. You have very specific policies and standards here, and you need to stick to them in the area of drones as well. So police militarization. Police agencies around the country have increasingly bought and used military equipment and training, as well as surveillance technology like drones. These were developed for military use. I have a quote later that's going to touch on, again, something that the gentleman from the Industry Association said. These are military use technology, but you have to ask yourselves, are Americans the enemy? And I think obviously the answer is no. So again, a Berkeley-specific point to make. Oh, great, actually this is what I wanted to read to you all. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has customized its Predator drones, originally built for overseas military operations, to carry out at-home surveillance tasks that have civil libertarians worried, identifying civilians carrying guns, tracking their cell phones. So this is from government documents that were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. This is not science fiction. These documents are available online, epic.org. Please go check them out. They're very concerning. Again, on the point of militarization, this is the Bearcat. This is the same model of armored vehicle that the Berkeley Police Department wanted to purchase quietly, just like the purchase of drones has happened all across the country, quietly. And when Berkeley citizens found out about it, they were upset. There was a public outcry, and the purchase of that technology was ended. And in fact, now Berkeley has a policy that any of these sorts of purchases have to go through the City Council. This was the Berkeley Police Department, along with UCPD and Albany, trying to purchase this completely quietly. And so it's clear that that's not acceptable here, and I would urge both commissions to follow that precedent and also restrict the purchase of a drone, or I'm sorry, the use of a drone, because we know that it's Alameda County that will be purchasing it. Corporate influence, so I just wanted to mention that in 2011, Public Records Act requests have shown that $21.9 million was spent by the drone industry and drone manufacturers and the agencies that represent them in lobbying Congress, and the result of that, as you can see, this is a screenshot of the Congressional Unmanned Systems Caucus. I think it's amazing that we have a caucus representing an industry in our federal government, and I would really urge, again, the commissions to consider that kind of influence and whether it is appropriate in this community. Biased policing. Drone use will exacerbate the use of arbitrary group criteria by law enforcement and target vulnerable communities. Biased policing already pervades local enforcement of immigration law, arrests for low-level victimless crimes, and intelligence collection. And that is why, again, going back to the suspicious activity reporting, you have limits on that in this community. Berkeley has one of the best detainer policies in California. and that is not to go into this too deeply, but basically it strongly limits any collaboration with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's just one example of the way in which Berkeley has been a leader in addressing bias policing. You have a police review commission. A lot of communities don't even have that. And that's not to say, I'm not commenting on where things are now in Berkeley. I'm just saying there is certainly an effort to prevent bias policing. Purchasing a drone, I think Anil mentioned, that it would be very likely there would be mission creep in the use of a drone, perpetuating the drug war. It's exactly the kind of thing, again, that is not appropriate for this community. So First Amendment concerns. I just, again, wanted to read this quote. Okay, all right, I'm gonna have to speed up. So Sheriff Ahern, when he was asked if he would use a drone to surveil a protest, said, "We don't want to rule out a lot of uses." And again, going to Berkeley policies, Berkeley General Order C1, again voted on in September of this year, requires that there be reasonable suspicion in order to do intelligence gathering. So I'm just going to sort of speed through this. I think we've talked a lot about the safety and the efficacy of drones. Actually, I guess at one minute I can talk about that a little bit. I do want to say that, we heard about some of the technical limitations, but here's the irony. Every single technical limitation that is in place right now makes drones extremely poorly suited for the uses that are constantly touted for them. Search and rescue, fire operations, right? They have 12 to the drone that Sheriff Ahern is talking about purchasing has a 12 to 25 minute flight time. It has to be flown inside of the operator. These are FAA regulations. It has to be flown only during the day. The various models of drones, it's hard to get complete information, but they have varying capacities in terms of dealing with wind and that sort of thing. And the point being that they're not particularly well suited to a lot of the uses they're touted for. They are very well suited for surveillance. We heard about some of the technology that they can be outfitted with from the EFF. As the technology expands and makes them perhaps better for these other uses, it's also going to make them much more powerful tools of surveillance. So the bottom line, regardless of county policy, because we know that that is in flux right now, Berkeley has the opportunity right now to declare itself a drone-free zone, becoming the third city in the country to do so. 2 cities have already done so, and ensuring that public discourse on the deployment of this dangerous technology is given adequate time and attention. And I welcome any questions about BORDC's model legislation. I'm sorry I didn't get to touch on that, but just wanted to emphasize the Berkeley-specific concerns.
Thank you, Nadia. I had 2 questions, and I know I'm sure other people have questions. But the first question is just, I wanted you to repeat what you said last, because you said it in a rush. You were saying that, the uses that the fire department and the police department have said, at least the Police Review Commission, that drones could be useful for, but in fact, the technology available to police departments doesn't maybe facilitate those uses yet?
The technology available on the drone that Sheriff Ahern is considering purchasing is, as I said, best suited for surveillance. That limited flying time back from his own statements, and the regulations in terms of how we can use it, those are FAA regulations. So when you take those regulations into account, you have to question how, and also another FAA regulation is that drones can be flown over populated areas. So you have to question how it would be particularly useful for the kinds of uses that he is constantly saying he would want to use it for.
And also, this is something that both you and Ms. Lai from the ACLU touched on, but I think that the surveillance apparatus that we live in is little understood by the general public and very complicated because of kind of post 9/11 knee-jerk reactions. And I wonder if you could touch on, again, suspicious activity reporting, fusion centers, and the connection to drones.
Absolutely, and I think this also goes to some of the questions about the places that have regulated the use of drones. I just want to say that the complexity of the national security apparatus is such that you have to have an extremely lengthy law to actually address every potential negative use of the information they can gather. So suspicious activity reporting is national, it's coming from a national level, but it's carried out by local law enforcement, and it's where they file reports that go to fusion centers that are based on this very fuzzy standard behavior indicative of a pre-operational planning. It's a very fuzzy standard. It is actually basically legal garbage because it's not reasonable suspicion or probable cause, which are standards that have been delineated in court. So there's these behaviors that law enforcement is supposed to look at, which include taking pictures that don't have artistic value, taking notes, things like that. And then this information is sent to fusion centers where it can go to the FBI. It will potentially never be deleted. It is completely in contradiction to California law, California privacy standards. And, again, I just want to emphasize Berkeley has limited the collection of this kind of information. If a county agency, however, is flying a drone in Berkeley skies, it's unclear what would happen to information that the county agency gathered. And I also want to be clear that Sheriff Ahern did put out a policy for the way that he would use the drone, and that policy didn't address these concerns at all. It was full of loopholes, and it did not, it wasn't clear about data retention, data destruction, those sorts of things.
Nadia, can you say some more? You mentioned the FAA restrictions and how they would affect or are currently affecting use of drones.
Well, as I mentioned, some of those FAA restrictions, again, include flowing, the level that drones can be flown at, that they have to be in line of sight of an operator. I believe that they can only be flown during the day, is that correct? And I do just want to emphasize that this statement here, while many view unaerial systems as a promising new technology, the limited safety and operational data available does not support expedited or full integration into national airspace. That is from the FAA, that's from testimony. And this testimony is a little bit old. It's about, I think, 1.5 years old. A lot of money was spent in between the time that this testimony was made and the extremely quick integration of drones into civilian airspace that we're seeing now.
Below 400.
I have a follow-up. So if the national airspace becomes integrated, what does that effect does that have?
Well, we've already seen that there have been instances where commercial airliners have had to do emergency landings because there were drones. There was an unidentified drone. This is a really sort of well-publicized example. I'm sure there's more, but there was an unidentified drone that interfered with the landing of a commercial flight at LaGuardia, or LaGuardia, as some people like to say. And I think one of the questions that was asked repeatedly was about private use of drones, and BORDC's model legislation actually addresses that. For the regulated use of drones, private use does also have to be regulated. There are serious concerns with hobbyists flying drones in the airspace. I mean, that's why we have such strict regulations, and these regulations really, I would argue, have been damaged by the rushed implementation, which is really being fueled by money.
Our next speaker is Andrea Pritchard from Berkeley Cop Watch.
Good evening. Well, I'm with Berkeley Cop Watch, and we're a very local organization. We've been watching police conduct in Berkeley for about 23 years now, so we've seen some patterns emerge. And one pattern is that we can't seem to gain accountability on the ground. So if the whole thing goes up in the air, we're kind of concerned that we're going to lose track of things. You see, I took a look at the ACLU's report, and I think they really come up with some wonderful guidelines for drone use. And they would be wonderful in a climate with effective police accountability. In the absence of a way to control the police, even the best guidelines, restrictions, suggestions are not really going to have an impact. And I'd like to share with you a little bit of our experience of trying to deal with accountability in Berkeley. And I think they're the folks to my left side, are very familiar with some of the shortcomings. I don't want to presume anybody's political affiliation. One of the guidelines that is suggested by the ACLU is that there should be strict compliance with search warrants, with the Fourth Amendment, and so forth. We have documented many cases of individuals being stopped on Berkeley city streets, being searched illegally, their possessions and their persons. And unfortunately, the more widespread the problem becomes, the easier it is for the police department to evade accountability, because it just becomes part of the climate. It just becomes part of the landscape. And so, if we imagine this drone secretly outside of your home taking pictures of you, you don't know about it, how will we ever hold them accountable? Even when it happens in broad daylight and on video camera, we cannot. What are the damages, other than to your dignity and to our culture, come from an illegal search? And so it seems that we can't stop the police in that regard. The ACLU also urges that there be limitations placed on the retention of images. If the drones actually record something, or if they actually take a picture, that should be for a specific set time. Again, at Berkeley Cop Watch, we've had the experience of asking Berkeley Police Department to reproduce, to tell us where are the photographs and what are your policies and procedures for disposing of them and dealing with them. But you see, Berkeley Police Department has fallen under a curtain of silence. They've fallen under a curtain of non-compliance with Public Records Act requests. You see, Berkeley Police Department doesn't even post its general orders on their website. Well, Oakland does, and San Francisco does. But you see, we have to file a Public Records Act request just to find out how they do crowd control, to find out the most basic things about our own police. So imagine trying to access their policies around drones. It's also said that there should be public notice, should be a guideline, a restriction on drone usage, and the ACLU recommends very wisely the policies and procedures for the use of aerial surveillance technology should be explicit and written and should be made public. We agree. And if we had any hope of getting the Berkeley Police Department to comply, I think we'd be more perhaps open to the possibilities. They also recommend democratic control. They say that deployment and policy decisions surrounding UAVs should be democratically decided based on open information and not made on the fly by police departments simply by virtue of federal grants or other autonomous purchasing decisions or departmental policy fiats. You see, if we can't even get them to come to this meeting, I don't think we're going to get the kind of cooperation that we would really need to hold them accountable for something as powerful as drones in our community. They also say auditing and effectiveness in tracking. You see, what we need is a way to track where has the drone been, what has it done, what did it yield, where did we get it. But you see, again, in our own police department a few years ago, there was a sergeant, Sergeant Kent, who retired soon after it was disclosed that he had tampered with, i.e. stolen, the contents of 300 evidence envelopes inside the department itself. And I sat on a Police Review Commission subcommittee, and one of our recommendations was that we do an audit, and instead of finding out how many times the evidence room was violated, let's find out how many drugs were actually taken, and find out, do we have a drug addict or a drug dealer in our department? Sadly, the city council itself declined the opportunity to audit that situation. And again, so I'm saying to you tonight that I don't believe that there would be a willingness to audit drone activity and to make that audit public. For these reasons, I don't believe drones, and the people of Berkeley Copwatch do not believe that drones should be flying over the airspace of Berkeley. Thank you. So, in our efforts to hold police accountable, I think what we need, with all love and respect to the people who serve and who try to hold our police accountable, because of Copley, because of other legal restrictions, our effectiveness in police accountability in Berkeley has been decimated. Decimated. Civilians do not control police functioning in our town. And until that is the case, I think any move towards drones would simply be reckless and self-destructive and destructive of our most cherished rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. This is Ken. I have a question. I saw Chief Meehan at the city council meeting last night, and he reiterated that he could not be here tonight. But his question to me was, what about a lost child in the Berkeley Hills? Would you use a drone for that reason or any other seemingly good use?
Yeah. I mean, I think we could respond to in a number of ways. I think that we could say, what about the violence that is perpetrated daily in our neighborhoods? What about the murders that happen in our city that go unsolved? What about the gentleman in the Berkeley Hills who called out for police protection and was not able to get it because our police were occupied with Occupy? You see, our police, our chief, was very interested in getting an armored personnel carrier. I call it an armored personnel carrier, not a tank, because he was adamant that I make that distinction. However, he said that he needed that tank for the lost child, for the hostage situation. He can always come up with a hypothetical, but I'm trying to deal with reality. How many lost children have we had in Berkeley? How many murders? What are our priorities? And where is he and where is the department when we're trying to actually set those priorities?
George Littman, Peace and Justice. Well, I've got my own hypothetical question. Well, this is something Copwatch knows something about, is racial profiling in Berkeley. And would you describe that, how would you describe that problem currently existing, and how do you feel that would be impacted by the police department? Not that they're currently seeking a drone, but say they had them. How could that problem potentially be impacted?
Sadly, Berkeley Copwatch, we have made Public Records Act requests to the chief regarding their ability to track the racial and ethnic data of the people that they stop right now on the ground. And he said, well, we got a new computer system and we just haven't figured out how to get that data. So apparently we spent a lot of money to get a lot less than we had a few years ago. So it's either through unwillingness or incompetence. I'm not sure what's going on, but we are not, they're not able to, the department right now is not able to produce any kind of data that gives us a picture of whether or not policing in Berkeley is racialized. Anecdotally, we're very confident that the Berkeley Police Department practices race-based policing. And we would love to see it stop. What Berkeley has realized is that if they just put a wall up, an information blockade, they can prevent any kind of real criticism, because our criticism is not informed except by anecdote. So again, I fear that drones will have an exponentially worse impact in that regard.
Thank you for speaking. My name is Sihanska Haney. I'm Commissioner with the City Berkeley Peace and Justice Commission. I have a question that has to do with, it's a legal question and also a question that happens on the ground. What do you know if there's what the policy is with an aerial surveillance camera, if there's any, that that takes a picture of somebody or something in someone's backyard. What is a level of expected privacy in someone's backyard, whether it be from a house overseeing another person's yard or an aerial, a UAV flying over said house? What can be distributed with that, with those photos, and does the public have access to the purpose of those said photographs?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not qualified to answer the constitutional questions you raised. Again, I can only speak from my experience. My experience is that there was a day laborer in West Berkeley, a man named Miguel Gonzalez, who came to the Police Review Commission and wanted to file a complaint. At that time, I became aware that the police had actually detained him and taken his picture. I have filed several PRAs, and now we've got a demand letter of the police department. We want to find that picture and find out what they did with it. And they're stalling and stonewalling. Yes, I can. Because again, if we cannot get one photograph and find out what they did with that, how would you find out what they did with the information that they got from a drone? You're welcome. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Professor Jennifer Urban, Clinical Professor at UC Berkeley School of Law. I'll repeat that. Our last speaker is Professor Jennifer Urban, Clinical Professor at UC Berkeley School of Law.
Thank you very much. Can people hear me? Is that good? Okay. I'm sorry that we're ending this with a law lecture. A little bit boring perhaps, but but I will try not to be boring. My thanks to the honorable commissioners and both the Police Review Commission and the Peace and Justice Commission for inviting me today. It's my great pleasure to talk a little bit about the subject that I was requested to speak on, which is what does the law say about drone deployment and what can it do? So there are limits. There are limits to what the law says and what they can do, but there are also things that it can help us with. So law has a number of attributes that are relevant to this question. First, it reflects fundamental societal values, and this is found in the top level places. For example, the U.S. Constitution's Fourth Amendment, First Amendment, 14th Amendment equal protection clauses, and things like the separation of powers between branches. These give us some guidance. The California Constitution in California specifically has Article 1, Section 1, which Ms. Lai already mentioned, which applies the right of privacy to every citizen in California. And one thing that I want to mention about that, which is different from the U.S. Constitution, is that it applies to private actors as well. So the California Constitution applies to both. There are also more specific places to look for fundamental societal values in statutes and cases where courts make individual decisions about specific situations. So beyond the fundamental values, the law provides more guideposts with more specific implementation, cases that touch on some related issues. Here, as I'll mention, these are not fully helpful because as we've been talking about all evening, the technologies are new, we are thinking about them, we are thinking about how society should respond, and cases and statutes are slow to respond to comparatively to technological changes and social practices. However, they can have some indications within them that are helpful. So examples you often hear about when it comes to drones are the aerial surveillance cases that are based on Cessna planes, sort of planes that fly at something like 1,000 feet and can see into what's called the curtilage, the area around a house, which is also protected by the Fourth Amendment. And those begin to, you can learn something from them, you can't learn everything from them because of the differences in the technology and how it might be used. There's a series of cases on privacy in the home and the curtilage around the home. This is the most protected space under American law, and there are a series of cases, again, none of which are directly applicable, from which guidance can be drawn. There's also a series of cases about public surveillance by video camera or tailing somebody on a public street. And these cases, again, so I'll talk about them a little bit more in a second, but these cases, again, give us some sense of what the law has been. And then there are statutes and regulations, none of which yet apply to drones, but that apply to things like sensitive information, like health information or smart grid information, or video viewing information. And these laws often take a particular approach. They may limit the purposes for which you can deploy a technology or use information. They may prescribe ways or limits on which data can be collected and how it must be handled. So I'm going back to the question about retention and destruction. They may talk about those things. So there are places in the law to look, and there are holes. So what can happen where technology and uses are too new for the law to reflect? One thing that we know is a known repeated issue that can happen is the mission creep that you've been hearing about. This is something that we have a lot of evidence, I'm happy to talk about in questions, over time happening. And this can result in over-surveillance or other issues that create a mismatch between public expectations and practice, or between those fundamental values and practice. And then what happens often is that there is a catch-up in the law. So I will give one example from the 20th century, spanning from nearly the beginning to the end. Is in 1928, in the Olmsted case, the Supreme Court said that wiretapping a home telephone was not a search and not subject to Fourth Amendment protection, because the court was thinking about this as privacy in the home, and because you could add the tap to the wire outside of the home, it wasn't within the curtilage and it wasn't within the home. That persisted for a long time, until 1967, after which society had changed, the expectations didn't match, and the Supreme Court said in Katz that in fact somebody who was making a call from a phone booth, not even from within the home, that was protected, that the Fourth Amendment protects people, not places, and that we understood these communications to be very protected. There are a number of other examples. Ms. Lai mentioned the GPS US v. Jones. There's the Kylo case, which deals with thermal imaging and reflects the courts addressing the challenge of, again, not going into the home, but screening through thermal imaging. And each time, the law has caught up some. So what are the limits to this? It can take the law a long time to catch up, 1928 to 1967, and then to the Wiretap Act, in fact, which was a statute. It can be partially updated, but not quite get at the core of the problem. So there's something from Supreme Court jurisprudence called the third-party doctrine, which says essentially that when you hand over records to a third party, you lose privacy protections in those records. And it deals with things like bank records and all kinds of records. It did not actually anticipate things like email, where people hand over, or a third-party provider like Google, for example, is holding this information. In 1986, Congress passed a statute to update this for the third-party doctrine. But it was 1986, thank you, which means that the law tried, but it didn't completely manage to anticipate or address the kind of ubiquitous storage of email and other kinds of communications in the cloud that we have today. So there's presently a discussion in Congress right now about updating EPA to the world that we live in. So it can happen, and it does happen. It can be slow, and it can be incomplete. It can leave things like mission creep in place. Now this is a very extreme example, and I'm happy to give more general ones. But for example, the National Security Agency began wiretapping American citizens during the War on Terror. And as the law began to think about catching up, what happened was actually the telcos who had been helping with this got retroactive immunity in Congress, so that mission creep got left in place. So what can we do and what can be pulled from the law, and how can the law help? Because I know the commission needs to make some recommendations. Number one is to keep fundamental values at the forefront, and to do that in some upfront policy and program design. As has already been mentioned, the law is not perfect at this, but if there is good planning and there is a good program that is implemented through and backed by well thought out regulations that are in turn backed by strong enforcement and the ability for them to evolve as needed so that we are not stuck in 1986 with our email forever, and that take into account actual features of the technology, the practice, and all the data flows. So the data flows wherever it goes, including, for example, to something like a fusion center, and that allow a good exit strategy. It allows, the regulation has some built-in way to evolve as technology and practices change, and there's a way to get out if you need to get out. Then you have a good opportunity of addressing new technology with a lot of uses in the community up front. I think that's my time, so thank you. I'll be glad to take questions.
I'm Celia Jayla Shannon, Peace and Justice. So let's say that the commission did decide to recommend a no drone zone, and the city became a no drone zone, and there was like a federal FBI manhunt that was going on, and they were using drones, and let's say there was a suspect in Berkeley, would our law overrule